Black perspectives haven't always been centered in the telling of America's story. Now, we're taking center stage. Introducing NPR's Black Stories, Black Truths, a collection of Black-led stories from NPR's podcasts. Search NPR Black Stories, Black Truths wherever you get your podcasts.
Support comes from Mercedes-Benz of Buckhead, where the power of electric meets the power of Mercedes. Introducing a lineup of electric vehicles, the EQB, the EQS sedan and SUV, the EQE sedan and SUV. The vehicles are all electric. The feeling is all Mercedes. Mercedesofbuckhead.com.
This edition of Political Breakfast was recorded 2 days before Governor Kemp was scheduled to sign a bill defining anti-Semitism into Georgia state law. Today's discussion doesn't focus on the signing, but more so on just how tender the subject really is. Welcome to Political Breakfast on WABE. All right, guys, welcome back for another edition of Political Breakfast. We are always glad you're here, and we're certainly glad that we are twice a week as political news is beginning to ramp up here in Georgia on all sorts of fronts. Brian Robinson is here. Tharon Johnson is here, of course. Hello to both of you.
Good morning.
Hello. It's good to be back. It's just been a busy week. But I'm glad it's not raining as much because we had some tough weather here last couple weeks in Atlanta.
It was all over the place, wasn't it?
It was.
Kind of like politics. It was hot, cold, rainy. We talked about Snowmageddon. It was the 10-year anniversary for Snowmageddon as well.
And Lisa, my grandmother used to say, this is pneumonia weather, baby. This is pneumonia weather. You go out here without no jacket on. This is pneumonia weather.
I love it. I love it.
Well, you mentioned the 10-year anniversary, and I did an interview with one of the TV stations because, of course, I was in the governor's office at the time of that. I was a spokesman for the governor dealing with that nightmare. And I have a real problem with the snowpocalypse framing of it because it wasn't snow. It was ice. It's the ice jam. That's what I think it should be called. Snow would not have log jammed the city in the region the way that the ice did. And so I did this interview and I was like, yeah. So the day it happens, I was with Governor Deal. We had been at the Ritz, of course, just to make the visual even worse than it could possibly be.
I was there.
Because Kasim Reed was being named Georgian of the Year by Georgia Trent. Yes. And so we come out and the city's already just at a standstill. It was an utter nightmare. And that night we held a news conference on it, and all of the local TV stations, every media outlet that could get physically to the Capitol, because it was hard to do, just screamed at Governor Deal in that news conference, all of them insisting that their weather forecast had told us this was going to happen, which was complete bull. No, there was a winter weather advisory or warning, but no one said there's going to be 2 inches of ice on the road by noon. No one said that, right? And once it happened, it was done. And there was no fixing it. I mean, there was no blowtorching the highway. And it was probably one of the worst weeks of my entire life. I mean, that night you had all these school kids stranded on school buses for hours, nowhere to go to the bathroom, nothing to eat, cold.
It was terrible.
It was terrible.
Yeah. But a lot of lessons were learned that day.
It hasn't happened since. We implemented some reforms.
Yeah. Well, fast forward 10 years to last week. Our Georgia lawmakers passed a bill that would define anti-Semitism in our state, in our law. And, Republicans united in support of Israel's war on Hamas during that effort. And, Tharon, maybe you can speak on this. Some Democrats, split over fears of suppressing support for Palestine. So here we are in the midst of this war as well. Georgia finds themselves in the midst of this conversation.
Well, Lisa, you've heard me on this podcast, and I've been pretty, sort of vocal, trying to really understand what's just going on in this war, this crisis that is going on over, in Gaza, and this determination by the people of Israel to protect themselves and go after Hamas. And one can debate, where you stand on that one, but I definitely stand proudly with my brothers and sisters in the Jewish community. And I think I've shared with this group that I had an opportunity to witness the horrific attack on Israel by attending a private screening. But at the Capitol last week, it was front and center again, where House Bill 30 was introduced, and it passed the House 129-5. And it passed the Senate 44-6. This was a bipartisan bill that State Representative Esther Penich had introduced last year, the only Jewish member in the legislature. And, you saw some concerns about it. Did it violate free speech? But I have to say that, you got to commend our legislature because this was a bipartisan measure that pretty much all Republicans supported. And you did have a few Democrats, Lisa, directly to your question. I don't want to put words in their mouth, but I'll just read a couple sort of reasons why they decided to either abstain, because you did have, I think, a member in the Senate abstain and then vote against it. But State Senator Nikki Merritt, a Democrat from Grayson, Georgia, who voted against the measure, said that this bill has been dubbed as anti-Semitism bill, but in reality, it's an anti-speech bill. She also says that it does nothing to protect Georgians from anti-Semitism. It instead imposes sanctions on those who speak out about the actions of the Israel government. Again, I respectfully disagree with the senator. She's a friend of mine and does great work at the Senate. And she was joined by some members in the House as well that had a pro sort of Palestinian message. But I think this was the right thing to do. And I'm proud of our state standing up at this time. And ultimately, it's headed to the governor's desk, and I'm sure he'll sign this swiftly.
Ever wondered where to find the best dumplings in town? Curious about Atlanta's obsession with lemon pepper? Join us on Savory Stories, a new podcast as we uncover the untold tales behind Atlanta's culinary scene. From the roots of your favorite dishes to the creators that bring them to life, we're diving deep into the heart of the city's food culture. Listen to Savory Stories at wabe.org/podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts.
WABE.
Hey y'all, I'm Mark Kendall.
And I'm David Perdue.
And we're the hosts of What's Good Atlanta, the new weekly comedy podcast from WABE.
On What's Good Atlanta, we run down uplifting and unusual headlines from the universe known as Atlanta.
And while we may not be journalists, we are comedians, and we'll be breaking down news and breaking down the stories that make you smile.
We're just trying to see what's good, Atlanta.
Episodes drop Fridays at WABE.org or wherever you get your podcasts. I get mine from a guy named Craig.
Shout out to Craig.
WABE.
Yeah, there are concerns that if you move to define anti-Semitism, then you should also define what prejudice is against African Americans, LGBTQ, Muslims, and on and on and on. So I think that was a major concern among some Democrats. I think it's fair to say.
And under this bill, anti-Semitic speech will continue to be protected by the First Amendment. And so that's the other thing that I think was good. And then last thing I would say, and I know Brian wants to finish us out on this topic, but, a stat that really was alarming to me is that from 2021 to 2022 alone, the anti-Semitic incidents increased 35% in the U.S. And so we oftentimes talk about the rhetoric and the hate speech, but also we don't really focus enough on the increase of the incidents that people are being attacked and these incidents that are happening. And it's grown in the U.S. in just those 2 years by 35%.
Absolutely. This is responding to trends, ugly trends in our country. And it is unfortunate that we needed to do this, but we needed to do this. The war going on between Israel and Hamas brought the issue of anti-Semitism to the forefront, but it also sort of was a factor in the increased targeting of Jewish people in this country. So Republicans have been united on this, and the Democrats have been divided on this. And there's ongoing news about the schism that it is creating. And we were talking in our show earlier in the week, and the schism that there is amongst the Republicans when it comes to the abortion issue. And this is something very similar for Democrats. The AJC reported this week that there are black pastors who are looking for a ceasefire, black pastors here in Georgia and Metro Atlanta who are pushing for a ceasefire. And some quoted it as saying it's going to be hard to get our congregation out to vote for Joe Biden. So this is going to be something that Joe Biden has to navigate on the national level because his base is divided on it. And he can't just be political. He has to lead. There are many people in his party who agree with what he is doing on Israel. And of course, many Republicans, including me, agree with him on Israel as far as taking the fight to Hamas. So it's going to be a politically delicate balance there. But one thing of note here on the local level is, at least in the state Senate, many of the Democrats voted on the issue and stayed in there and cast their ballot. In the House, many of the House Dems walked out. They voted on the bill before and the bill after, but refused to take a stand on this particular issue. I would imagine that those who are in swing districts will be hearing about that in the general election campaign, because Republicans feel very strongly about this. They're united on it, and they believe that most Georgians stand with them when it comes to protecting our fellow Jewish Georgians.
Yeah, certainly a topic that has to be approached very, very gingerly. Want to thank both of you for your thoughts on that. Let's do it again next week. Political Breakfast right here on WABE. Y'all have a great week, and we'll check in next week.
See you next week.
Have a great week.